The 2014 FIFA World Cup and 2016 Summer Olympics, located in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, use ads conveying images of nationalism and togetherness, being broadcasted on screens around the world and showcasing Rio as a highly developed city in a prosperous nation. However, below the surface of ad campaigns and theme songs, there are parts of Brazil engulfed in poverty, environmental degradation, and ailing health. These parts are called favelas. Favelas, also known as slums or shanty towns, lie on the periphery of major cities, often along railways, roads, shorelines, and on steep hills, and are generally formed by cycles of rapid urbanization and poverty. These cycles not only create marginalized communities, but also subject these communities to environmental damage and health issues. Favelas are located in many of Brazil's cities. 6% of Brazil's population lives in these shanty towns, although unofficial estimates are as high as twice this number. With the World Cup and Summer Olympics dominating Brazil's priorities, many favelas are being taken over, leaving the urban poor homeless. To promote a sense of prosperity to other nations, Brazilian officials are willing to force people out of their homes so that tourists are not so heavily confronted with images of intense poverty.
Vai vir a Copa do Mundo aí, eles querem isso aqui. Acho que para fazer estacionamento, que é o que eles dizem. Ninguém chegou para você e veio dar satisfação, não.
According to the United States Environmental Protection Agency, environmental justice is defined as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people regardless of race, color, nationality, or income. In Brazil's favelas, this fair treatment is apparently non-existent. Justice can be achieved in two forms, distributional or procedural. Distributional justice calls for equal exposure to environmental goods and bads. Procedural justice prevents environmental bads from occurring in the first place by engaging stakeholders to change the societal structures behind these bads. Social and economic processes have been at play over time to produce and reproduce environmental injustice in Brazilian favelas. Capitalism and the treadmill of production have been the two primary processes. The treadmill of production is the process that drives people for more consumption and leads to more production based on increased demand and thus supply. This process creates waste and large energy losses. The waste from the capitalist society often ends up disproportionately affecting the poor favela communities. Additionally, as industry grows, poor communities are taken over by new infrastructure, and the residents are forced elsewhere. Pervasive social inequality began with colonization by the Portuguese. Portugal was quick to use natives and blacks imported from Africa for slave labor in agricultural industries like sugarcane and coffee.
Slavery, unfortunately, lasted in Brazil until the end of the 1880s. It was the last country to abolish slavery in the Americas.
But has Brazil really left its slavery past behind? The exhibition curator has his doubts.
Abolition came too late to Brazil, but clearly it left a legacy which in a lot of ways we still haven't overcome.
Brazil's economy rapidly developed after World War II. Coffee drove Brazil's economy in the late 19th century and was eventually commodified and commercialized. These processes demanded more intense infrastructure, marginalizing people and their communities. The economic crash of the 1920s diminished the coffee industry, forcing Brazil to industrialize further, implementing more modern labor relations and production practices. Such modernized practices led to a rural to urban migration, eventually leading to 90% of the population living in cities today. As this migration intensified, vicious cycles of rapid urbanization and poverty began to form favelas. Urban land was scarce and low-income housing was hard to come by, so many people were forced to settle on unoccupied spaces on the outskirts of cities. During the 20th century, planned cities further spurred urbanization due to the hope of better access to resources. However, the planned urban housing did not come at a price accessible to all migrants. The physical marginalization experienced by the poor is problematic because the outskirts of the cities are often left in poor conditions, debris are dumped, leaving piles of trash, and steep hillsides create susceptibility to landslides and flooding. The result of Brazil's urbanization process has been the creation and perpetuation of environmental injustices in favelas. These distributional injustices include the visible accumulation of household waste and garbage and land degradation, but also invisible injustices like travel pollution, inadequate sanitation, and inadequate public health services. Lack of sanitation in favelas is one of the major environmental and health risks facing its inhabitants.
De água e esgoto está junto com a rede de água, de água pública, né, da SEDAI, água para beber. E você tem esse encontro, a contaminação, e você tem vários problemas de saúde, como meningite.
This has been viewed as an injustice through the lens of basic human rights. Human rights are violated when individuals are not given equal access to necessary resources for survival based on their socioeconomic standing. As a result, favelas have become places of distributional injustice. There is a huge disparity between the resources provided to the poor versus the rich within Brazil. For example, the 9% of people living in the best areas of Sao Paulo consume 5 times as much water per capita as the 41% of people living in the favelas. The susceptibility of favelas to natural disasters is also a major issue. Because of the frequent marginalization of favelas onto steep hillsides, they are prone to landslides and flooding. This video shows a landslide in Natal, Brazil in June 2014. Although no one was injured, at least 25 homes within favelas were destroyed. Again, the poor are generally more impacted by these types of natural disasters than the rich, which is another case of distributional injustice for Brazilian favelas. There is still much work to be done moving forward in the area of procedural justice. Procedural justice would ideally see an increased role in the decision-making for favelas by the people living in favelas. Such justice would mean that people living in favelas would be included in the planning of major city events, such as the Olympics and World Cup, to ensure that their concerns are met, rather than forcing individuals out of their homes. Today, many individuals living in favelas do not even hold basic citizenship rights. Until individuals' rights as citizens are recognized and favela communities are included in major city plans, there will be no way for favela communities to exercise procedural justice rights to have their voices heard on issues like poor sanitation, disease, and hazardous living conditions.